Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to my little corner of YouTube. We have another book review for you today, and this might be my book of the year. It's going to take something special to top this one. Celestial Monsters by Aiden Thomas. This is book 2 in the Sunbearer Trials duology. This came out in September of this year, so it's only been out about a week at time of recording. As always, we shall talk about the story, the characters, the world building, and the presentation before I give my final thoughts at the end of the video. However, we do need to start off with an overview of where we left off after the Sunbearer Trials. So straight off the bat, there will be some spoilers for book 1. So let's dive in. So Sunbearer Trials itself is kind of a mix between Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief and the Hunger Games, with a bit of Central and Latin American flair and mythology kind of infused into it. Your main character is Teo. Teo is a jade god, specifically the child of Quetzal, who is the goddess of birds. There are 3 ranks of gods. There are the golds, who are the most powerful of the gods, quite often linked to pure elemental forces. You have the jades, who are slightly more human in many regards, a lot less powerful. And then you have the obsidians. The obsidians were the dark gods who have been banished in ages past. All their children have been disappeared, and they have been locked away in the skies, the constellations which we behold at night. Every 10 years, there is a competition where the person who finishes bottom of the leaderboard of the Children of the Gods is sacrificed to recharge the Sunstones, and that keeps the Obsidian Gods in check. Generally speaking, the Sunbearer Trials themselves are entirely comprised of the Children of the Gold Gods. This year, something was slightly off. There were 2 Jade Gods present, one being Teo and another one as well, who ended up turning on them at the end. As it turns out, this has been a plan by the head of the Obsidian Gods to return and wreak havoc upon the world, which they believe is theirs by right. You had a number of twists and turns. It was a book with a great deal of world building and a great deal of character and a great deal of banter as well between your main characters. So that's where it left off. So where does the story then go from here? This takes place in the immediate aftermath of the Sunbearer Trials, with the return of the Obsidian Gods and the capture of a number of the children of the gods that have been present within the world. And this is a far more traditional quest-based story than the first one was. The first one was all about the competition. This is all about a quest to put things right. You have 2 different points of view in this one, and it's actually quite refreshing because the points of view you have are of Zhao, who is the betrayer, who is actually revealed to be a child of the Obsidian Gods themselves and has been plotting to fetch them back. And you have a great deal of character growth going on with him. He takes 1 chapter, and then Teo, who is the main character of the Sunbearer Trials, then takes the following 2, and it alternates like that throughout the book. So you have the period of Zhao finding his place within the Obsidian Gods with his own father and all these dark gods and the realization of what he's done. And then you have Teo and their quest and this sort of struggle, especially from Aurelio and Niya, who are really struggling to come to terms with what has happened. The fall of their cities, their inability to protect those that they are promised to protect, and this level of self-doubt for these powerful godlike, although not actual gods, godling people who have always been so self-assured and so certain of themselves, especially as over the course of the book you discover some of the truths that have been hidden over the years, and you have a number of themes running through this that talk about acceptance of self, the dangers of power. You have the tendency to rewrite history by the victors comes into this as well, but you also get redemption is a big factor of this as well, and the importance of friendship and how kind of found family in many regards, although it's not quite a found family trope, can be the real driving force to get you through the toughest of times. It's got a great deal of heart. You have a great deal of banter between the characters. This is a relatively formulaic story in terms of what it's doing, but it's the window dressing in many regards that makes this pop in a way that sometimes a lot of similar quest-based fantasy doesn't quite manage to do. And the thing that really continues to make this pop, just like in book one, is the characters. Character work was at the centre of book one. It continues to be on book two. We'll start with Teo. They are overall the main character. They are the Sunbearer, as they won the Sunbearer Trials technically. And really what you have is this level of inbuilt guilt to the character built through this. They didn't perform the sacrifice at the end, and in their mind, they have let loose the Obsidian gods. And there's a level of almost blame going on there, or self-blame. But then the acceptance that what they did was still the right thing. And you begin to see this questioning of the status quo and why have we done things this way for so long. And it really emphasizes the fact that the children of the Jade gods in particular are much closer to humanity than the gods in many regards. They're a lot more grounded in their approach. And you know, Teo is such a kind and warm and caring person. And of the characters, is probably technically the weakest as well. You know, they're a Jade. They don't have any great magical powers other than their ability of flight. But they're brave and they're mischievous. But you also have the ongoing development of the relationship with Aurelio. So Aurelio is one of the most powerful of the children of the gods. And it started, there's always been a thing between the two characters. And I love the fact that you see this natural progression there as both these characters get flustered, even though they're in these horrifically dark times and difficult circumstances. But you also have almost a level of distrust, because Aurelio themselves are very honour and duty bound by the fact that they're a hero. They're a hero to humanity. They're there to protect them. They take that role seriously. And ultimately, their biggest focus is on their duty to give everything to protect humanity. And that leads to Aurelio keeping secrets, but it's never held against them, you know. And you have these really awkward moments, which is quite typical in any sort of teenage romance, as they kind of trip over each other or say things they don't mean to, or people point things out to them that are very much blush out loud moments. And it's just so, so sweet. You then have Niya on the side as well, who is Teal's best friend. And whilst not quite as powerful as Aurelio, this is a character that in book one was just so full of swagger. And you see moments of that, but then you realise how much of a facade it is and how much self-doubt is creeping in because of what's happened. The feeling of we need to save all these people and having to fight against the fact of we can't save everyone. We have this job to do. And that inner conflict and the breakdowns that this causes at times as well. Continues to be a wisecracking character. Still a great deal of fun on the page. But the one I really want to talk about is Zhao. So for every chapter that is Zhao's, you get 2 for Teo. So Zhao doesn't have quite as much time, but has the most compelling character arc in many regards. You have a character that's coming into this book as the de facto villain. They betrayed their new friends. They set evil loose upon the world in the names of power and acceptance. And much like Teo in the first book, who was seeking acceptance from themselves in many regards, there are a lot of parallels between these characters. Teo and Zhao are both transgender, and you have this struggling to deal with pronouns and accepting of who you are again. But whereas Teal's issue in book one was self-acceptance, which was shown in their plumage and their wings and their kind of rejection of self at times, even though the world in general did actually accept them for who they were. Zhao is kind of the other way around because of their own heritage as well. This is a character whose entire family has been exiled. They've been lied to all their life. They've been treated like an outcast because of where they've come from. and has had to keep the secret of their true heritage from the world for their own protection. And you've had this inbuilt hatred bubbling, this doubt of who they really were, and this vengeance which they can harness because of their actual parentage. And you have this moment of, I'm free and I can be who I am, which is a really powerful moment. And then the doubt starts to set in as they begin to see what's happening to their friends and the other children of the gods now that they're being kept captive. And the fact they're being challenged by these people, but also kind of dismissed by the Obsidian gods, whilst their own father god is relatively accepting to them. The others, like Chaos, are very, very dismissive. And it comes through and kind of rattles that self-belief a little bit. And the further into the book you go, you see this beginning to get rattled more and more as they realise maybe this new world isn't what they were promised and not quite what they wanted. There are a number of other characters that appear throughout the book. Zal's adoptive father, who brought them up as a jade, has perhaps the most bittersweet ending towards the entire book. And the fact that you have this theme of rewriting history and their part in that and the guilt that they feel is very much a driving force forward and is pivotal to the ending of the book as well. And it's an amazing character moment. And then when it's all over, you have this staring into the sunset, and it's a sweet ending, but a bittersweet ending that works really well from the character's point of view as they begin to throw off the shackles of expectation, especially with, for example, Aurelio. In particular, of being expected to be a hero and actually going to do what they want to do and what they enjoy and what they love. And that comes through throughout. The love of food is something else that comes through, but that's something I'm going to talk about in world building. The world building in book one was stellar. That continues here. This is still an incredibly vibrant world, but this is a vibrant world under assault, so there's a shadow hanging over everything. You get the sense of scramble and panic and how the humans have become so reliant overall on the gods for protection as things begin to disintegrate and the Obsidian gods and their monsters move in. And I say monsters because that isn't a completely fair description of what these creatures necessarily are. And the further into the book you go, you come to certain situations where humans have been more empowered. You have this idea of the collective, of people standing on their own, the gods just being there to guide rather than protect. And those communities are doing relatively fine, which is kind of emphasizing the idea of the collective as a group working together to do things, which I really, really like. This also continues a great deal of world building from the first one based around the importance of food within the culture as well. You have lots of foods mentioned. You have the importance in terms of hospitality. You have it mentioned in survival. You have the characters' love of food as well and the different types of food that they eat. And I can't remember which author said it years ago, but they said that if you really want to build a believable world, you start with the cuisine. You start with the food that people eat and you build from there, because that's the everyday thing. And it really does help ground this very mystical world in a more realistic setting, if that makes sense. But also the idea of the scarcity as they're going through and struggling to find or make or forage for resources. You also have the theme of the rewriting of history. This is something we see in the real world where the victors write the books. And you have this whitewashing almost of history where, well, we didn't do the bad things because we're the good guys. But they did do the bad things. Maybe not as much as the other side, but what they did was pretty heinous. And what they've been doing over the years is pretty heinous. And you have this deconstruction of the status quo. And the challenge back to just because something is tradition doesn't mean it's right, which I think is an important lesson as well. And the fact you have this younger generation questioning the way things are done, and that's something that's very pertinent to modern life as well, which I really, really do appreciate. The world isn't quite as vibrant, of course. That makes sense because of the nature of this story. But even looking at some of the locations, the way they're described, the way that they look, you get the sense of a living, breathing world, which I really did enjoy. Presentation then, and once again, this knocks it out of the park in terms of the way that the plotting is done, the pacing is perfect. This is a surprisingly breezy read for how dark it actually goes at times, and that is a testament to Aiden Thomas as an author. The last book I read by them, I was a little bit thrown off because it didn't quite fit. But much like Cemetery Boys and Sunbearer Trials, this is based on Aiden's own work, whereas Lost in the Neverwood is a Peter Pan inspired retelling, reimagination. And I think free of those constraints, Aiden really does fly much like Teo within the book. You have this really interesting habit of going the one with Zhao and the two with Teo, which does act as a balanced narrative, and in many regards they are both mirrors of each other with what they are going through for different reasons, which is a really fascinating dichotomy to look at. Adding to the ability to really paint the picture on the page of the world and what's going on, and what you have here is an amazingly well-presented, well-paced YA novel. On top of that, you do have the cover. Now, we're going to start on the front because obviously you have, I'm presuming it's Aurelio, and obviously it's Teo. But I didn't notice at first, but as you turn it round, on the back, hiding, shunned, rejected, you have Zhao in the background. And I really like that because, again, that's driving home Zhao's feeling of isolation and being rejected by their fellow children of the gods. And it does an amazing job of highlighting not just Teo's story and Aurelio's and the blossoming romance there, but the fact that you've got someone who's made a choice and it's left them even more alone in many regards than they were to begin with. This is spectacularly well done. There is cursing in here. When it's used, it's appropriate as well, which I appreciate. And it's always impactful as well. Finally, the banter continues to be stellar. The chemistry between the characters really does pop off the page in a way that many books don't. Just like Sunbearer Trials, and in fact, actually pushing quite close to Cemetery Boys, where I think the chemistry was actually, if anything, slightly better. This really does pop as well, and it just made this such a fun read. I read this in 2 sittings. It comes in at 400 pages. I'd have done this in 1 sitting if I didn't have to work. Brilliantly written, brilliantly paced. Cannot talk highly enough of this one. Final thoughts. Probably book of the year. There's not much that I'm intending to pick up this year that I think is actually going to beat this, if I'm completely honest. This book, and it's forebear as well, because obviously it's a duology, so you've got Sunbearer Trials and Celestial Monsters. As a package, these are exceptional, but as standalones, they equally stand well above a lot of other YA that I've read, and just fiction in general, to be fair. And there's a number of reasons. You have deep characters with believable motives that have a great deal of chemistry on the page. Not just the main characters, the chemistry between the side characters works really well as well, be that when they're interacting with each other or interacting with the mains as well. You have an amazingly well-realised world. It's well-paced with a great deal of tension. It has some twists and turns in there which are just off-kilter enough that they take you by surprise, but they don't come out of left field and they do feel believable. And they're just, bizarre though it is to say this, considering, especially in book 2, the nature of the book, just a fun time to read. You want to spend time with these characters in this world, and I adore that. Just like Sunbearer Trials before it, Celestial Monsters for me is a 5-star read. I highly recommend picking these books up if you haven't already and giving them a try. Well, that's my thoughts on Celestial Monsters by Aiden Thomas. I would love to know what you think of this if you've read it. Let me know in the comments, and I will catch you all very soon.